we've had a ton of questions. I've had a number of people call me up directly, and we've had a lot of feedback from our webinars talking about what is the difference between family processor and parameter jammer. Why would I use one versus the other? Why don't I just use the cheaper tool? Because parameter jammer is significantly less expensive. Why not just use it? And so today I'm going to try and show you exactly where each of the two tools fits in your workflows, who is really the target market for those tools, and why you perhaps need both within your company. And actually, I do honestly feel you need both, and I'll show you why that is. So with that, let me jump into the presentation here, and let's talk about some of the issues that people have. In fact, I mentioned similar issues in my last webinar talking about shared parameter manager in family processor. But I'm going to talk about them again, but specifically to talk about the differences between family processor and parameter jammer. So users very commonly go to outside sources and download content. Whether you want them to or not, in a lot of cases, users do that. Now, in smaller environments, you have a bit more control over that, but in larger companies, you just don't. And when they do that, that tends to cause a lot of problems in the actual project environment, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But the reason why there's problems is they're downloading content that was built on completely different standards than what's been set up in your firm. Maybe it was an acquired company that you purchased, so it's an outside company that already had some pre-existing standards and a bunch of content, and you're trying to take the two different workflows, two different templates, and merge them together to get them all in a consistent type environment. And in the meantime, there's going to be content from both sides that's going to work its way into templates in this acquired company. Or you're just downloading manufacturer content. Now, this is incredibly common in the MEP trades for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. You're going to be, you guys go up and you download manufacturer content all day long. There's absolutely no way you're going to build yourself up a full library of content. You need that manufacturer content built per their specs. Of course, every single manufacturer out there at the moment is basing their content on a different shared parameters file, so none of it works within your schedules. So all this family content is based on outside standards, and manual correction of this is incredibly tedious. It's a problem. Users don't necessarily know how to do family editing and family creation, nor really should they, in my opinion, in most cases. Now, maybe a light understanding of what's going on in the family is important, but full-on family creation, understanding of all the ins and outs of parameters and shared parameters and formulas and all that jazz, probably they shouldn't know about that. But at some point in time, this content has to be corrected so that it can function properly within your environment, so it can schedule correctly, it can be tagged correctly, and ultimately, in some cases, the data can flow properly between one piece of content and the other, especially in the world of MEP, but also, just as importantly, in architecture. So let's take a look at some of these issues that I have seen. I'm going to use primarily architectural examples today, but keep in mind these exact examples, these concepts are the same for all of the disciplines out there. I see this all the time, but for sake of time today, I'm going to be showing one particular set of examples here. So I've got an office building here, and in this office building, I've got some divergent standards in the furniture, for example. If I go into my furniture schedule over here, this is where in a lot of cases it's most apparent. If I go into the furniture schedule, I can see that for the most part, most of the properties are scheduling acceptably. In the exception of two pieces of components right here, I don't have the width, depth, and height of these particular parameters here. The omni-class title, omni-class number, those are all built-in parameters. There's type data, there's family names, of course, that's all the same. But in this case, the width, depth, and height, just the general space it takes up, that is not being able to be populated here, and I really want it to be. I want to have some general sizes, and so for my standards, I want that information. Now, if I go down into another schedule in here, and this is an area where architects specifically see a lot of divergence in standards. If I go down here to the door schedule, in this case, this particular door schedule isn't really one that I would normally use as my standard. So before I go too far here, let me use the BIM list tool over here, and I'm going to go grab a door schedule that is a part of my standard. So I'm going to grab my company standard door schedule right here. I'm going to drag, well, I can't do that. I have to go to a plan view first. Let me drag and drop that into my project here. It's going to load up that particular schedule with all of its fields. It's going to load up the exact headers, the groupings, the title of it. Everything's all been configured the way that I want it. And if I look through here, you'll notice a lot more parameters that are custom to me. For example, the type of the panel, the material that's on that panel, the finish. None of these parameters on the majority of these doors are filled out properly. There's a few that are, because a few of the doors are my standard, but then a number of them came from outside sources. That's a problem. Now, fire rating in all cases, that's a built-in parameter. The comments field is built in. Door number, which is marked, that's been built in with height, thickness. But all these middle values here that are the panel type, material finish, and the frame type, material and finish that I want to schedule, those aren't functioning. So we're going to talk about how to fix those today as well. So I'm going to do both the furniture schedule repair and the door and frame schedule repair today live in this webinar. Now, in some cases, it's a relatively simple fix, right? It's just width, depth, and height, pretty easy. In some cases, it's a bit more complex. And so because it's a bit more complex, I might need to use a bit more powerful of a tool. And so we'll talk about those. So let's go back to the PowerPoint here for a moment, and let's jump into the first solution here. So the first solution is a user-based solution. Now, I'm talking about two tools today. Again, I'm talking about Family Processor and Parameter Jammer. Now I'm going to talk about the easier of the first tools first. So this is the user-based solution, solution number one. What I'm going to be using here is Parameter Jammer. I'm going to be able to fix a family, or just a couple of families, a handful of families, live in a project. I'm going to be able to base this on the company standard shared parameters file. I'm going to be basing this also on an existing project schedule, because ultimately as an end user, what I see, the result that I need is to get my actual schedule functioning correctly. I don't really care about the rest of the parameters. I just want my documentation set going out the door correctly. It's a narrow-minded thing, I understand that, but ultimately that's where we make our money in a lot of cases, is getting the project complete and out the door. So I need to get my documentation set looking good and complete. And I need to have a minimal impact here on my project timeline. I don't want to be wasting all kinds of time or waiting for the BIM manager of my company to be able to get time set aside to take care of my one family or my 2 or 3 families. I want to get the job done. So that's why I'm using Parameter Jammer here. So let me go to the next slide here and talk a little bit about it. What this allows users to do is update content without having any real knowledge of family editing. They have to have just a little bit of knowledge. You have to understand that shared parameters are important. They do have to know where the shared parameter file is, but they don't have to actually open up the family at all and do any editing to the family, and they don't save the family back to the network ever. It's just for their project and just for this one situation, which is perfect when they're doing things like downloading outside manufacturer content. It's not necessarily something that needs to be in your standard. It's custom to this one project. So we've provided a simple 3-step wizard that lets them go through and choose a schedule that they're trying to resolve, the family that's going to be resolved in that schedule, and make a couple of choices about the parameters and then tell it to go. And the great news here is it handles about 90% of what most users run into. It might even be a little more than that. I'm being a little conservative here. It's about 90% in my opinion. And what this really does is it facilitates them having a little bit of independence. They can go get content that they need without waiting around and slowing down projects. And they have the ability to get their projects still out the door and have the data, for the most part, the part that you care about, being correct. And you can make this as robust or as narrow as you want, depending on your schedules. Now, here's the most important thing. Users do have to be able to read from the shared parameter file. That means they have to know where it is, and they have to be able to open it for read. They are not in any way going to be writing back to that shared parameter file. They're not saving anything to the network other than what they're doing in their project. So that's important. They do have to know where that file is. If you feel you have to have a separate shared parameter file that's someplace public, that's fine. But managing 2 shared parameters files, in my opinion, is a really bad idea. Usually, even in large companies, I see a lot of success with companies letting users at least read from the shared parameter file. So let's take a look at how this functions and how rapid this actually is for the end users on that furniture schedule, where there's only a few things that need to be corrected. So I'm going to toggle back into Revit here. So here in Revit, I happen to be on the furniture schedule, and again, I've got these 2 chairs. They happen to be from the same manufacturer. They're both from Herman Miller. They're both seating components. They're both furniture. It happens to be the Aaron work chair and the Aaron side chair, the task chair. So both of those, I want to just get these 3 parameters pushed into those families. The rest of the content either came from my network, or I've already fixed it, or something. I got some Hayworth content in here. I've got some other manufacturers and whatnot, and some other box content as well. But I want to get those two fixed. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to go here to my Revit Express Tools. Now, because I happen to have the family name listed here, I know exactly which families this is. So I'm going to go ahead and leverage that just by selecting it from a list. So here from the Revit Express Tools, I'm going to go to Parameter Jammer. Now, Parameter Jammer is one of the tools we've got in the BIM project suite. Remember, I said earlier that this is a relatively inexpensive tool. You buy the suite, you get a ton of fantastic tools here, things like Spreadsheet Link, View Creator, stuff like that, that users generally should be using. In this case, Parameter Jammer is a tool we feel they should be able to use. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Parameter Jammer. By the way, those of you who are BIM managers, if you feel they should not be able to use it, you can go here to Suite Settings and you can turn it off if you feel it's dangerous. But let's take a look at this. So I've got my furniture schedule as the schedule that I'm trying to fix here, because it's right here I feel like it's broken. So I'm going to be using this schedule and its fields as my properties. Up here, I happen to have a shared parameters file set up. It's just a little local shared parameter file I set up for today's presentation. I took a copy of my Superdoor parameters and I added a couple of things to it, and I also have in there, of course, width, depth, and height. And so I'm using these for today's presentation. So this is where I'm reading from a shared parameter file. In no way will you ever see me actually save anything back to this file while I'm within the Parameter Jammer tool. So I have the furniture schedule selected. It's the only one that I've got checked here is just the furniture schedule. That's the one I'm trying to fix. And if I go down here to the family list, I can drop this list down. This will show me every family that's available for me to swap parameters out. Any one that's actually placed physically in my model. So the one that I'm going to work with here first is this Herman Miller Seating AE11 Aeron work chair. It's the whole family. I'm going to be fixing that one family right there. Now, if I didn't know what the name was, but I knew that I just downloaded a piece of content, if I was in a plan view, I could actually pick the family, just graphically select it in the plan, and that would let me actually grab its name and then do the rest of my steps on that. But if I happen to know the name, I can just choose it from my list. That's my preferred method, unless my list is incredibly long. All right, I'm going to go to the next step. So this is step one, choosing the schedule and the family, and just making sure I have a parameter file selected here. I'm going to go to the next step, step two. What this is going to do is read through the schedule. It's going to read through my parameter file, make sure I have the right parameters, and it's going to read through my family and see what doesn't exist. So it's going to do a little bit of work in the background and kind of just make sure that I've got access to all the parameters that need to be scheduled that aren't currently the same. Now, it's not going through every one of these chairs out here and finding out what parameters they've got and all these different furniture components. It's just looking at the schedule and saying, oh, yeah, width, depth, and height, those don't exist in that family that you chose. And because they do exist in the shared parameter file, I'm going to help you swap them out. And not necessarily swap them, or it might just drive them into the family directly. So if I drop my list down here, this is the user's choice right here. This is their step two. They can go through each one of these parameters. So I've got height here. If I drop this list down and I had other length type parameters in that family, it would list them and it would let me swap out one of the ones that does exist for the one height. So if they had one called chair height, for example, I could swap that out. Now in this case, this particular family doesn't have any length type parameters at all. So instead of me going through each one of these, if there was more, I might just say, you know what, I'm going to take all of the parameters that exist there and set them all as type parameters. So it's just going to push the height parameter from my shared parameter file into that Aeron seating chair right there, and it's going to make a parameter called height as a type parameter. Now, if they don't necessarily know instance or type, it doesn't really matter technically for them. If they're a little bit more knowledgeable and they know enough about what the difference is between type and instance, fantastic. Then they can make the right choice there. In my case, I feel it should be done as a type. If I'm choosing a certain size chair, a particular one, size B, that has a certain size to it. But, you know, whatever. If they don't necessarily know that, not a big deal. So now I'm going to go to my next step. So I've added them all. I'm going to push them all in there as type parameters. My next step here is going to just give me back the actual chair completed. It's going to actually do the processing. This is it. This is where it's going to actually run those changes. And it's going to give me a list of what it actually was able to do once it's done. So it's going to, in the background, open up the family, and it's going to start making changes. So it's got depth, height, and width that's now been pushed into that family, and my final thing here is I'm just going to click Finish. So it's done. Now, I didn't necessarily give it any values, but if I click into my schedule here, you'll notice I now have 0 inches wide, 0 inches deep, and 0 inches high. I did not have to do any family editing whatsoever. So I don't have to know how to do family editing. I just need to know what the family name is and that I want to fix it and make some minor choices. So I'm going to do that one more time so you can see this happen again. I'm going to do the furniture schedule. I'm going to do that other chair, the side chair. Notice how this is one at a time. This is not designed to be a batch process. This isn't designed to fix a whole bunch of families. This is designed for that 1 or 2 or 3 manufacturer's files that I've downloaded that don't match my standard. So I'm going to go through again, furniture schedule, side chair. It's my step 1, just making my basic choices. Click next. It's going to run through that family and process it. Just kind of not process it yet. It's just going to look at it and find out what it needs to fix. In this case, height, width, and depth again. I'm going to set all of those as type parameters. Set them all that way. And I'm going to go next. When I click next here, it's actually going to run the process. It's going to fix them. And ultimately, when it's done, and I close this box out when I finish this, it'll have those values in there. So I'm seeing a couple of questions come through. There was a question that says, do you need to make a choice in the family parameter to swap? What happens if I don't do anything? Well, then it just ignores it. It basically means it's not doing anything at all. If I was to go, I already did that. I don't have any other examples. I should have read that question first because now I can't go back. Well, I can go back. I can undo. Let me undo my load family because you notice it is actually loading the family. So here I just undid my last little set of changes here. If I go to parameter jammer and I go next on that particular side chair, it's going to find those values up there. If I do nothing and I just click next, if I don't make any choices here and click next, parameter jammer is just going to go, oh, well, you didn't want me to do anything with that, so I'm just going to skip it. So it does nothing, basically. I have to actually make a choice for at least one of these for it to do something. So there was a question in there also about, does it group it in something other than the other group? And the answer is yes, it does actually. That's actually something that I'm going to be submitting as a bug report. I noticed on mine that it keeps saying other, but it's actually putting it into a group that's not other. So let me do this real quick here. Add as type, set, and click next. Let's process this and let's take a look at the actual chair here in a moment. So it does actually, if your shared parameter file has them sorted with the same groups that you would see in Revit, then it'll put it into that group by default. So if I had my width, depth, and height in the dimensions group, it actually adds it to the dimensions group. It's just that this parameter jammer tool here is reporting other, but it can actually put it into the proper group. So that's actually I'd call it a bug. So we're going to get that fixed. There was one more question here. It says, does it import custom parameters into the target family? So what it's actually doing is opening up the family in the background, and yeah, it's adding shared parameters to that family, and then it's loading that family into my Revit project. So yeah, it's importing the custom parameters, those custom shared parameters, directly into the individual family that I've chosen. It's not making it a project parameter, it's adding it to the specific family. So it's actually modifying that family, though it's not saving that family anywhere in my network or my computer. It's just opening it, bringing those parameters in, loading it into my project, and then closing the background family. It's not saving these anywhere. The originals, if I load them back into my project again, would have the same problem, right? I'd have to manually save them out. And we did that because, again, we don't necessarily want users saving content with this tool. This is designed to be a project-specific fix. So it helps me fix this. So now that I've done that, both of these families have those parameters. Now I'd mentioned that I believe it's putting them in the dimensions group. Let's just go find out, though my shared parameter file might actually be a little bit unorganized and it might go into other. Let's go find out real quick here. If I go to the Herman Miller seating family here and I grab one of these chairs, if I click on that and go into properties here, yep, notice how the dimensions here, width, height, and depth, it's added them as type parameters and it put them in dimensions. So that is actually a bug in the parameter jammers reporting window. It is actually adding it to the group where the width, depth, and height is within the shared parameter file. If that group in the shared parameter file matches a group here inside of Revit. So it's doing that. All right. So let me Let me take one more question here from the question queue. It says, can it also import or write to families so as to save the family independent of the project? Ah, okay. So now we're trying to take a piece of content and make it sort of more in line with the standards on my network. Now, this particular tool, Parameter Jammer, only writes stuff to families that exist in my project and then loads that family into my project. It doesn't actually save it anywhere. This tool is not designed to save anything out on the network at all. It's designed, again, to be a simple tool to fix simple schedule problems here in a project. If you want to save content like this Herman Miller content and make it a bit more company standard, that's when we're going to go to the next tool that we're going to talk about today. So let me toggle back over to the PowerPoint, and I'll answer that question here in just a moment. So the next tool here is the second solution, solution 2. This is a manager-based, a BIM manager-based solution. BIM managers are the ones that use the tool that we have called Family Processor. Family Processor is a much more powerful tool. You can update family content with standard parameters based on the parameter file. That's the same between the two tools. There's no difference there. The difference is I can batch process multiple families, which is actually the original core family that exists on my computer or on my network someplace. Now, what is Family Processor really doing? What it's allowing you to do is make a lot of changes to a whole bunch of families. You can mass resort parameters, you can mass change parameters, you can mass update formulas, you can do a lot with materials as well, though that's not really what I'm focusing on here today. You can save your processes for future updates, so I can make these processes repeatable. In fact, I've got a saved set of settings that I might use today, depending on what you guys vote on here in a moment. But Family Processor is designed and purpose-built for the BIM manager to update network content in a consistent fashion. I've used this in a lot of ways. I've used this to repair content that was acquired from outside manufacturers. So I download a lot. If I go to Herman Miller, for example, and I was going to go download their entire library of content, there is absolutely no way that I want end users to be going through every time they load that content in their project having to use Parameter Jammer. That'd be mean, and it would be very inefficient. So what I would do instead, since I know that their parameters don't match up with my standards, and I know that they're going to use that particular content all the time, I'm going to use Family Processor to mass fix, to mass modify all of the Herman Miller content and bring it into alignment with my standards as much as I need to. I can actually bring all their parameters into alignment with my standards if I want to, but I usually just bring in as much as I need. In this case, for today's example, it would be the width, the height, and the depth. There's probably in other cases going to be a lot more than. If I was doing MEP content, there'd be things like voltages and horsepower and airflow properties and all kinds of other things, filter properties, things like that. But I would use Family Processor for that. So if I was going to go download, say, McQuay content, or I'm going to go download, Johnson Controls York content, they're going to be built on two different standards, but I want them to work in my project. Now I'd download a bunch of their pieces, and then I'd fix them all as the BIM manager. I'd fix them all at the same time, since I know that probably all the JCI content's going to be built a certain way, all the McQuay content's going to be built in a consistent certain way, so I can use that content accordingly and fix it using Family Processor. And then I might even save my changes so that the next time I go grab JCI or McQuay content, I'll have a basis for which I can go through and rapidly fix that content as well as a BIM manager. This isn't a tool I want in the hands of an end user. This is a tool that if the end users got their hands on, they could very easily destroy a whole bunch of stuff. And so you want to know what you're really doing in the background with Family Processor. Because, yeah, I can make mass changes, and mass changes can be mass fixes, or they can be mass destruction. So you want to make sure you know what's going on there. So what I want to do is go to Revit here. I'm going to actually demonstrate the Family Processor portion specifically to help fix some of those door issues. And there's actually going to be a little bit of an area where it's not going to work 100% right, and I'll explain why that is. And it's actually because even in the Revit interface, if I was going to do it manually, it doesn't quite work right because of the way that the outside content was structured. And it's only for one type of parameter that doesn't work, and it happens to manifest in today's presentation when I'm talking about doors because of how I build my doors. But I wanted to make sure I showed that to you so you guys would understand if something goes wrong, how you can see what that is and how you can kind of figure out why. Okay, let's jump back into Revit here and talk about fixing the door schedule that I now have in my project. Let me collapse out this furniture list here and families list, and we're going to go to the door frame schedule here. So here in the door frame schedule, again, I've got a lot of different families. I don't necessarily know what their family names are directly, but I've got a lot of different families here that don't align with my standards. So let's go through the process of fixing them. Now, I'm not necessarily going to load them back into here. I'm just going to show you, I'm not necessarily wanting to load stuff back into this project right now. I just want to show you how family processor specifically works. So if I go down into my families list here and I look at the doors, all of these here that are doors underscore, these came from an outside source. They don't necessarily follow my standards. Now, they have a standard in and of themselves, but they don't follow my standard. My standard was I have a swing door, a swing double door, I've got a bifold door, and I've got a few panels that I want to work with that as well. But these doors here, these are the ones that are actually not aligning with my standards. So I want to bring them into alignment. So I took these from my project and I saved them out to an outside folder. So right here, there's my doors in an outside folder saved out. I didn't save my doors in that folder, the ones that were the swing and the swing double, the bifold, because I already know those doors are correct. Those are the ones that are functioning down here in my actual schedule. Those are correct. It's these ones here that are wrong. I did a little bit of kind of sleuth work to figure out which ones were the problem, and so I saved them out for you ahead of time so we could have these available to work with. So I'm going to open up one of these doors. I'm going to open up, let's see, we'll grab this one here. Doors interior, now I'll grab the single door. Doors interior single narrow light. I'm going to grab this door, and I'm going to use this as my sort of template for fixing the rest of the doors here. I'm going to pull this back off to the side. So I'm going to go to open, and it's reminding me that I haven't saved for a while. I don't care. Forget that for now. And I'm going to go to where I've got that content saved, which I believe is here in my desktop. There we go. So it's this folder right here. And I'm going to grab the interior single narrow light door. Open this up. And once this door is opened, I'm going to use Family Processor. Now, Family Processor does not run from the project environment. In fact, if I close this family back down again, give me a moment, bear with me. Remember how I was here in Express Tools? I can even be in a schedule, and I ran Parameter Jammer right from here. That's because this tool is designed to be used in a project environment. Family Processor, if I try to open it up right now, it says, nope, you can't do that. You're in a project file. This only works, this add-in only works with family files here. So I have to be in a family file in some form. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that narrow light family. And I'm going to fire off Family Processor now. So here in Family Processor, there's a lot of different things I can do. It's a much more complex tool. And if I gave this to a regular, user who doesn't necessarily know family creation in the first place, or even if they did, they don't necessarily know all the full ramifications like a BIM manager might, and they start looking through here and seeing all these different settings, they're going to freak out. They're not going to know necessarily what's going on. So I'm going to start by creating some new settings here, and we're going to take a look at some of the things that I'm going to be doing. Inside of my options, I have an option set that automatically deletes all the junk default materials out of a family. That's just one of the things I do by stock, but I want to point this out because you're going to see this later on. Even though you're not going to see me visit this Change Materials tab, I'm not doing anything here. There are a lot of junk materials there that I don't want, and so I'm going to have them deleted out by using just my basic options here to just delete all the junk defaults that I don't care about. I could do things like sorting parameter names within groups. As I receive outside content, one of the things that drives me nuts is when I get content whose parameters are out of order. And that's true for any family that's 2014 and before. In a lot of cases, in almost every case, the parameters are in some random order or they're in reverse alphabetical order. So I personally, when I'm running Family Processor in 2015, I feel like, why not just sort things within parameter groups? I make that choice at the family level. For today's purposes, I'm going to focus on changing parameters. But if you want to see a more comprehensive demo, check out our YouTube channel. You can see more about Family Processor up there. But you can do things like changing materials in depth, adding, deleting, and renaming materials, modifying some of their properties. You can do some family level stuff, all kinds of really powerful things. But for today, I'm focusing on changing parameters. Now, my first thought is I want to fix anything that they've got that is of panel material, panel finish, panel type, frame material, frame finish, frame type. Those are the first 6 parameters I'm going to focus on, and for today's purposes, those are the only 6 parameters that I'm going to focus on. So I'm going to go here to change parameters. I'm going to do a replace. I'm going to start with just replacing parameters here. Now, if I look through here, I'm going to see frame finish. There we go. There's frame finish. That's one of the ones I wanted to fix. So I'm going to drop that down below. I'm going to fix that one. So it happens to be a material parameter type. That's fantastic. I do have my correct shared parameter file selected up here, the same one I was using earlier. I'm going to take frame finish right here, and I'm going to swap it out, or replace it with frame finish. So they've got one called frame finish, but it wasn't scheduling correctly. It was their own frame finish. So I'm replacing it with mine from my shared parameters file. Simple fix there. As I go down my list a little further, I notice there's no frame type. There's also no frame materials. I need to add those later on. Down here, I've got a panel finish and a panel material. So I've got both of those. I'm going to add those down below. I'm going to take my panel finish, which is the material. I'm going to swap it out for panel finish, which is also material. The list here that is presented to you, Family Processor only shows you parameters that are the same type as the parameter you're trying to swap, because in Revit, if you're going to try and swap a parameter, you have to swap it with the same type of parameter. So Family Processor conforms to the same rules. Notice here, panel material, it says text. That means that if I drop this list down, I'm only getting text parameters. Now, I happen to know in my shared parameter file that I have a parameter called panel material. It's a material parameter. It's real material. I can't actually make this swap here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat. I can't use this family as my template. I'm going to try to fix it in case any of the other families for some reason have a panel material that's a material. I'm just going to pull this out of here real quick and type in myself panel material, and I'm going to tell it that it's actually a material type of parameter. That's not force. Come on now, Sean. Pick the right thing. Material. Here's material. So I'm going to add that down below. So here's panel material. It says parameter type is material. Now, it's going to fail because within this family here, panel material is text. But I'm just setting myself up a default process that I can use here. So let's do this. Replace with panel material. So in case it finds one that is material in any of the other families, it's going to replace it with panel material. Now, I also want to do frame material. So I'm going to go ahead and type that one in. Frame material. And it's going to be material. I'll add that down below. And I want to swap it out for frame material in case it finds it. Now, that's 4 of them. I mentioned there was 6. If I look through their list right now, I don't see that they have anything in here at all called frame type or panel type. So they have no ability to schedule what type of panel or what type of frame in the schedule. That's based on how this particular family was built. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and type those out. So I'm going to put in frame type, which is what I know mine is called, and I know it's a family type parameter. So I'm just going to type F here for family type, and I'm going to add that down below. And there's also panel type, if I type it correctly. I just didn't make sure that I keyed this in correctly. That's the only important thing here. I could also cheat and show all of my parameters and choose it from my list, but and I probably should have done that, but I decided to just type it in here instead. So here's frame type. If I do find frame type, and if it does happen to be a family type parameter, I'm going to force it to swap out for my frame type. And if I do find panel type, and it's a panel type parameter, or it's a family type parameter, I'm going to swap it out for panel type. So I'm basically finding one for one the names. Find finish, swap it for the frame finish. Find frame material, swap it for frame material. Now, in some cases, this is going to fail. And actually, in this family, for example, notice how they didn't have the frame type or the panel type in here. So I'm going to take a step and go a little bit earlier in my process back to where it says add shared parameters. I'm going to add those 6 parameters directly to my family. Now, if the parameter already exists with that name, it's going to fail. It's going to say I can't add this because it already exists. So it can't add something like frame finish when frame finish is already there. So it's going to try to add it first. If it doesn't exist, it's going to go over here and try and replace it with the one that I want it to be using. So I'm just going to go through and find those real quick. So let's just type frame here. I'm going to grab frame finish, frame material, frame type, and I'm also going to do panel. By the way, if you guys don't know about this, the still only names containing is directly filtering my shared parameters list. It doesn't care what group it's in, though it shows me what group it's in. I can filter down and find parameters with certain names very quickly here. So panel finish, panel material, panel type. So I'm adding those into my project. Now in some cases they already did exist. The frame finish exists right now as an instance parameter. I don't like that. Actually no, I do like that. Frame finish should be instance. Frame material should be type. I like that. Frame type should be type. That's fantastic. Panel finish should be an instance. Yes. Panel material, no, that should be a type parameter. So I'm going to uncheck this and add it as a type parameter. And panel type should be a type parameter. At least that's the way that I want to do this. Again, I'm making choices that this family works consistently now at this point. So I have to make sure that I make those choices properly. Now, also over here to the right, the add to group option. Notice how it has materials and finishes, construction. It knows it's supposed to go to construction. The reason why it knows that is because my shared parameter file itself has the same group names in it, and these parameters, this one here called frame type, was in the construction group. So it knew to add it directly to the construction group when it adds it to my family if it doesn't already exist. So you organizing your shared parameter file neatly and nicely is going to save you a lot of trouble later when you do things like family processor. And if I didn't like that, I could always override that and say, you know what, no, I want you to go into data, or I want you to go to constraints. I can override that. By default, that's the group it's going to go into, which is pretty cool. By the way, if you are looking for the ability to manage your shared parameter files and clean them up so you can do stuff like this, use the shared parameter manager tool up here, and you can take a look at one of our previous webinars about that from before. Okay, so I've gone through the process of adding shared parameters to my project. That's my very first step. Now, some of these parameters like panel material already exist. They're already in there, and it was already in there as an instance parameter. So it can't add it because it's already there. It will go over here and it'll swap it out. It'll swap panel material for panel material if it can. It's actually probably going to fail because, again, panel material was text, so we'll have to do something else for that in a moment here. But I do want to also change some of these parameters. Now I'm going to cheat here and just show all of my parameters, and I'm going to type in frame so I can do this pretty quickly here. I'm going to change them in this way. I'm going to take the frame finish, the frame material, and the frame type, and then I'm going to do panels, panel, finish, material, and type, and I'm going to modify them in some form. Notice how the frame finish here in my current family, it's set to an instance already, and so I'm going to force it to be instance also in case it wasn't in any of those families for whatever reason. In the case of frame material, it's not in my current family, so it says no change, but what I want to do is force it to be type. In fact, I'm going to do that for the frame type as well. And panel finish, it's currently instance. That's fantastic. For panel material, it currently says instance. I'm going to force that to type. And so even though it is text right now, I don't care. I'm just going to put panel material, whatever parameter type it is, it's going to push it into the type of parameter. And panel type here, again, also I'm going to force this one to be type. I'm going to take and get rid of any values. I don't necessarily want to change my family's values anywhere. I just want to, you know, leave those, whatever the values are now, the way that they are. Over here for groups, it says no change all the way down the list. Well, I may want to change the groups. I want to put these things in certain areas like finishes. I like to be in materials and finishes. The material, I want materials and finishes. The frame type, I want to be in construction. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that. Construction. So materials here, and construction. So I've gone through and made a bunch of choices. I'm saying add 6 parameters. If you can't add it for some reason, meaning it already is there, replace it with my parameters. And if it was already there, also update them all to be instance or types appropriately, and move them to the correct groups in case they were in the wrong groups. So I'm making a whole series of changes. 6 parameters, all being updated in these families, in 10 families approximately. So with this all done, I've you know, again, this is not a dialogue you want end users playing with, because they could really mess stuff up. BIM managers are the ones who should be working with tools like this right here. We just couldn't build this level of intelligence to understand things like regrouping and swapping parameters and possibly even updating formulas in a tool that is simple as Parameter Jammer in 3 steps. But we wanted to give the users the ability to fix their projects when they needed to. Okay, let's go through the process of actually fixing this content. So I'm going to go ahead and search for my content, which is in my Revit Family Processor Parameter Jammer folder on my desktop right now, in my Doors folder. I'm going to take all of this content and add it below. I'm going to process all 10, and while I'm processing these, I'm going to be answering a few of the other questions that were asked earlier. Normally, I would recommend previewing only and not actually making any changes, but for the sake of time today, I'm going to go ahead and just make the changes. I'm going to tell these families to resave even if nothing is needed. That's a pretty typical habit of mine. And I'm going to just save them in the actual main folder. I usually save them to an alternate parent folder. For now, I'm just going to save them in the actual main folder, so they'll be right there, and we'll be able to go see those updates. If you're expecting most of this to work and just have a couple of errors, you could log only the errors. But in my case today, I really want to see what everything it's doing. I want to see everything it succeeds at. I want to see everything it fails at, so I can make some choices based on that. And in a couple of cases, we'll see that the type parameters, those frame type and panel types, aren't going to want to add to some of the families. And I'll explain why. And we're also going to see in some cases that material parameter isn't going to swap properly because it's text. So we're going to find out how to fix that as well. I'm going to tell this to go ahead and begin. And I happen to actually be in the family, one of the families I'm trying to process here. So I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to shut down family processor, close this down, and I'm going to close my family and just start a new junk family so that this family here itself can also be processed. So let me do a new family real quick. Oops, that was a new project. Try this again, Sean. New family here. And I'm just going to choose, it doesn't matter what I choose. It just has to be a family. I don't even know what I picked. Let's see. Express Tools Family Processor. Awesome feature of Family Processor. It remembers your settings from session to session. That's why I clicked New Settings earlier, because I didn't know what I had in there. So if I go here to change parameters, it remembers my 6 that I'm adding. It remembers the 6 that I'm replacing and with what, and it remembers what I've told it to change down here. And it also remembers the selection that I had chosen for the actual families to be processed. So let's go ahead and begin this, and it's going to give me a list of everything it's going to do. So it's going to delete all the junk materials, adding parameters, replacing with my parameters, and then changing them if they're not correct already. So I'm going to go ahead and tell it to continue processing. So this is now in the process of ripping through my content. It's on a different screen there. You can't see that because I can't move it over for whatever reason. But I'm going to go ahead and answer a couple questions here. It does say, do either of these tools work through links? Okay, Parameter Jammer only works on content live in your active project. So that one does not work through links at all, because it actually have to open up that linked model in the background and make changes to it. And I don't necessarily think that's a good idea for users to be able to make changes to files they don't realize they're making changes to. So that one does not work through links. Family Processor itself works directly on family files, so because of that, links aren't even relevant there. You're working directly on the family content, so that one doesn't even matter because it's not a link itself. So there was another question that I think I already touched on here. It said, can I also write to families out of my project, or with something like Parameter Jammer? Can I actually save content out of my project? And the answer for that is, again, no. Parameter Jammer doesn't do anything outside of your project. It's only internal to the project itself. I mentioned earlier a little comment there about Family Processor potentially being massively destructive, and so someone put a little comment in there that said, rename it to Weapons of Mass Destruction, WMD. Yeah, I know, right? It's all good. Okay, is there a tool available to add new shared parameters to a schedule that already exists in your project? And that is a very interesting question. We're actually in the process right now of working on a tool that helps you do things like, right now I just was working with Family Processor. This tool here, Family Processor, lets me swap parameters that exist in families, but it doesn't touch your schedules at all. We're actually looking at a tool right now, we're trying to develop it, that's going to let you go through after you've fixed all your families, especially if you're in the process of changing standards company-wide, and letting you swap headers in schedules as well, to swap one parameter for another. And that one's probably not going to care about data types. We don't care what that is. We're just going to take and say, take this parameter and swap it out for this other parameter over here, and it'll also help you do things like maintaining groupings on your schedules and maintaining column widths and maintaining overridden headers and things like that. So that'll be an interesting tool. Now, I don't know if it's going to necessarily let you add parameters to your schedule, because the actual schedule tool is pretty good about that already, the default out-of-the-box tool. We're just trying to automate the process of fixing schedules. So I don't necessarily know that we're going to recreate the entire schedule interface and have you be able to author a new schedule from scratch, because the out-of-the-box schedule tool does a pretty good job of doing that. So one person also asked, could I run parameter jammer on content, and then once I did that, could I basically save it out to my network and basically replace my current standard families? And the answer to that is absolutely. In fact, if I was doing 1 or 2 families as an end user, and I feel like I'm going to be using this particular family on a couple of other projects, or possibly, you know, I'm downloading a piece of manufactured equipment and I fixed it enough to work in my schedules, could I save that out to my network and make that a family that I could source perhaps for a multi-Revit model project system or something like that? Yes, absolutely, go for it. Now again, it's not going to happen in batch, so you can't process, you know, 30, 40 families super quickly. It's still faster than doing it by hand, so you could definitely do that. Okay, let's get back here to Family Processor. I want to be respectful of your time there. We got about 10 minutes left here, so I'm going to go back here and take a look at Family Processor, and let's see what it did. So I'm going to go down and find that one door that we were working with here, the one that was the doors interior single narrow light. So doors, where is it at here? Interior single full glass. Here we go. There's the door that I was using as my template. Doors interior single narrow light. So let's see what it actually did to that one family. So here it says materials deleted. This is the part that was successful. It deleted a bunch of junk materials that I don't really want in my family. There's a couple of other materials that we have in our list that sometimes show up. In this case, they didn't exist in this particular family. So it did not delete things like analytical floor surface, slab surface, wall surface, earth, phase new or phase temporary. And the reason why it didn't was because they didn't exist, and it tells you that. It says error, a material with that name, blah, 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 was not found in the document. So it didn't exist, so it didn't delete it. That's cool. It let me know that it didn't do that, but it let me know that it did do the stuff up on top here. So let's see what it actually did successfully do. It added frame material, because that one didn't exist at all in any fashion in the family. A lot of those have that particular error message there, and when that particular message shows up, that basically tells me that there's a different data type here. Panel material was text before. I can't swap it out for material. I can't do that even by myself in the Revit interface. So I'm going to have to do something different. I have to take and delete the current panel material that exists in there in another step. So if I go back here to change parameters, I might take right here and just add panel material and add that as a parameter that's going to be deleted. And so it's going to delete that material completely out, destroy all the data in there. It's only text. I don't care. It's not linked to anything anyway. It's not driving any materials. So I'm going to erase it, and then I'm going to add all those parameters that I want, and then I'm going to replace with shared parameters, and then I'm going to change anything to the correct grouping so it all gets in the right spot. So in this log file here, it's just letting me know. This is why I usually would preview. Over here, remember I said preview only? I should have probably previewed this ahead of time. So I could have double-checked that just to make sure that that it was doing what I wanted to do before I committed my changes. Let's see what else it did down here. If I go down my list here, panel material was successfully changed to a type parameter. So even though panel material couldn't be swapped right here, it did successfully change it to a type value. This will be less relevant to the next time I process through if I was to do this again, because in my change parameters I'd be deleting that material in the first place, so it wouldn't need to do that. But that was the only one that it actually needed to switch. There was some unsuccessful changes though, and in fact probably because I was trying to replace a value with space, or with a space, and it didn't like that, so it didn't make a change there. No big deal. It could not move things like frame finish because it was already in that group, and so it lets me know some of these things it could not do. And then finally it sorted everything alphabetically, and then it saved my family. And so I use this log file after I go through and process some families or even a subset of families, and I just make sure that anything that I wanted to update was able to update or responded as I expected it to. And if it didn't, then I go back and I make any changes to that, and then I reprocess my content. Now, for sake of time today, I'm not going to reprocess the content, but I am going to show you one thing that it did not do, and I'm going to show you why it did not do it. I'm going to show this to you back in that internal family again, that internal door. Which one was it? The narrow vision. Yeah, narrow light right here. I want to show you something. Notice how it did add my panel type, which is a family type parameter. It added that one, but it did not add frame type. That was the problem. And I wanted to find out the other day why that was happening. And so I went into this family myself, and I manually added frame type and found out exactly why that was happening. Again, This is a family type parameter. So I'm going to shut this down, and I'm going to open up that narrow vision single or narrow light single interior door. Let's open this up. It's been modified. It does have that one parameter in there that was called panel type. So notice it does add panel type. That's not a problem. And so it did that one just fine. It put it in the construction group exactly as I wanted. If I add another parameter here, it's going to be a shared parameter. I'm going to go ahead and choose this from my construction group here. I'm going to add in frame type, which is the one that failed. Let me okay that. This one is a family type. It's of a different category. It's called Windows. It's going to be grouped underneath construction, same as before, and I'm going to add it as a type parameter. Now, as soon as I click OK here, we're going to find out why this fails. And those of you who are going to be relatively new to Family Processor, when you see messages in that window that says something went wrong, usually it's because something in the Revit interface itself, you can't even do it here. And if you can't do it here, Family Processor can't. So be careful about submitting a thing going, oh, Revit Family Processor is bugged. It's not. Usually, it may be, but usually it's not. Usually it's because you can't even do that in the main window itself. Like right now, when I click OK to this, Revit's going to pop up and say, there aren't any window families loaded in this project. For a family type parameter specifically to be able to be created from scratch, you have to have a family of that category in the project already. Now, coincidentally, this particular family did have a door type preloaded into it. It did not have a window type. So because it doesn't have a window family loaded, it can't actually add it, and Family Processor doesn't go to the level of actually letting you choose a default family to load in. Maybe that's a future wish, I don't know, but for right now it doesn't do that, so it fails because it basically says no, it cancels out of that, and so it doesn't add the parameter. Every other type of parameter that exists in the Revit shared parameters file can be created directly. It's just those that are family types, like this one right here, where it requires a door category that happened to exist. The window category for the frame type did not exist, and so it couldn't make that one. So for that one, you have to do something a little bit different. But at least the list tells you that it couldn't do it, so you can respond to that in some fashion or form. So I'm going to shut this down. There was actually a question that popped up, and it talks about one of the features that I have not touched on yet for Family Processor. With Family Processor, once I go through and I get this working the way that I want, if I expect to be getting more families from the same source, maybe it's from the same manufacturer or from a same company in some form, whatever the case may be, I'm going to want to save my settings. And I'm going to want to take those settings and reload them later. For example, I saved all my settings. So if I open up a settings file here, my base door settings from, I was configuring this a couple days ago, if I open up these, it loads and replaces all of my settings. So it's probably going to look pretty much the same. If I go add parameters, oh, I forgot about this one, appear and schedule. Yeah, I wanted to have that one added as well. So I could have added appear and schedule to my list, and I can replace all my parameters just like I did before, and I can change parameters and regroup them as I expected to from before. I did a little bit of sorting here just so I can keep my brain in order. I moved them up and down in my list, and so remember those settings as well. But one of the questions that popped up was, where is the default location for saving settings for a Family Processor file? And I believe by default it just goes to the user's My Documents folder, but you can choose wherever you want it to go. And in fact, I usually would save my settings if I was going to do this for real and keep this someplace on my content network. Maybe it's in my ICS, my content solutions folders and things like that. Someplace in the network so that not just I can recall them, but if I've got a team of BIM managers, many of us could recall these parameters and leverage them on content that we're potentially fixing. But definitely leverage this save settings, because that way if I came in here and I made a whole new set of settings, clear all my settings out, and I'm like, oh shoot, I want my door settings back. It's as simple as opening up your settings and grabbing your base door settings. And then it loads them up, remembers all the settings that you had put inside of there, and saves you a whole bunch of time. I was going to ask earlier if anybody wanted me to just load my settings or to do it live, but I felt like it would probably be more important to just actually set this up live and show you how much time it takes to do that. Because if I was going to go through and manually process those 10 families, it probably would take me about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, if I even got it done consistently in the first place. I have to open up the families, look and see what's going on, make all those decisions manually every single time. This way I can make my decisions once, and then once I've made them, tell it to run against all 10 families. One thing I do want to point out, as I'm doing things like opening settings and saving settings, it does remember whatever my last location was. So even from a couple days ago when I was getting ready for this particular presentation, it remembers where I was saving these settings, as long as that location exists. If I delete this folder or rename it, it's going to default back to my my documents folder by default, I believe.